Paul states the facts unblushingly. One either has or has not the gift. If one lacks the gift, only one course is in order. He must marry, for moral danger is too deadly. For most people, the maintaining of a life of purity in body, mind, affections, speech, and conduct, for most people, that will only be attainable within marriage. And for the vast majority of people, it is the will of God that you be married. Within marriage, God has provided for the fulfillment of those natural instincts and desires which He Himself has implanted within us. Hebrews 13:4, marriage is honourable among all, and the marriage bed undefiled. 1 Corinthians 7:3, let the husband render to his wife what is due to her. The context makes clear that what is due is the sexual relationship. Let the husband render to his wife what is due to her, and likewise also the wife to the husband. Do not deprive one another, except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. God requires purity in body, mind, affections, speech, and conduct. And for most people, that purity is to be found in marriage rather than in singleness. That's the first practical implication. Secondly, God's requirement of purity means that we must be careful about our practical behaviour. The larger catechism, you notice, spoke about watchfulness over the eyes and all the senses, temperance, keeping of pure company, shunning all occasions of uncleanness, and resisting temptations to it. Well, we'll look at that in a few minutes when we look at verses 29 and 30. And then the third point is that God requires us not only to be mindful of our own purity, but also of the purity of others. We must avoid being a cause of stumbling to others. Notice that the larger catechism speaks of chastity in body, mind, affections, words, and behaviour, and the preservation of it in ourselves and others. And this is a very serious matter. If the lustful look is sin, then we must not do it. But equally, we must not be the means of tempting others to do it. Listen to our Lord's words in Matthew 18, verse 6. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks, for stumbling blocks must come. But woe to that person by whom the stumbling block comes. We are not only to have a concern for our own purity of body, heart, etc. We are also to be careful that we do not put a stumbling block in the way of other people. And in that context, The larger catechism, of course, also speaks about modesty in apparel. Modesty in the way that we dress. And in this particular matter, I think our principal appeal must be to the ladies. It's not so much a problem with the men, although these days it might even sometimes be that. But for the ladies, it is something to be taken very seriously. That the Bible requires you to take a good look at the way that you dress, to take a good look at the way in which you are seen by others. Now, this is an area, of course, where standards have plummeted in recent years in the world. And it is an area where it is perhaps all too easy for Christian girls simply to follow the fashions of the day and not to think biblically. But modesty in dress is God's requirement. 1 Timothy 2:8, I desire therefore that the men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety, what is proper, what is fitting, and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing. Here, Paul is speaking about conduct in church. That's the overall theme of the whole epistle. And he's appealing that when you come together, that the men pray. The word translated men means men, not human beings, members of the human race, men or women. The word in this instance means men, males. That the men among you pray, that they lead in prayer, that they take their part in the congregation in praying, and that the women adorn themselves modestly. And he appears to be speaking about the church, how we appear in church. Not that that gives us license to be completely different outside the church, but it's a reminder that today, even in church, coming to church can be a source of temptation to men. Jesus goes on to speak about if your eye offends you, cut it off and so on. If your right hand causes you sin, cut it off and cast it away. I'm going to argue in a minute that he's talking about avoiding the occasions of sin, avoiding the occasions that lead you into temptation. And it occurred to me last night, the terrible thought that, what would I say to somebody that said, well, in that case, I'd better not go to my church because of the way that the women dress. We've got to be serious about this. It's hard in today's society to have a pure heart. The hymn, I think it was written in the 19th century, but it's even more true today. The world is ever near me. I see the sights that dazzle, the tempting sounds I hear. Christian ladies, do you want to be guilty of making life harder for your Christian brother than it already is? It is hard enough living in the 21st century without you making it worse. And then something I've drawn attention to before, and I feel tremendously strongly about this. I was reminded of it just the other week in Singapore where there's such a mixture of races and religions and so on, and the Muslim ladies all dressed very modestly and so on, concealed from view. How do you think that the devout Muslim lady reacts when she observes the way in which some Christians dress? Do you think she is ever likely to pay the smallest attention to a message of salvation coming from someone whose standards of modesty she rightly despises in her heart? Is it not sad that so often Christian standards here fall below that of at least the best of the Muslims? We need to take this seriously. Well, let's go on to that very point. Verse 29. If your right eye causes you to sin. Our Lord here is emphasizing the seriousness of God's standards. He is telling us that we must be pure. We must pursue sexual purity. How important is it? Well, he says, if your right eye be the means of causing you to sin, pluck it out and get rid of it. If your right hand be the means of causing you to sin, cut it off and get rid of it. At the very least, he is saying we must take this matter very, very seriously. What does he actually mean? Well, first of all, it is clear that he cannot intend to be understood in a strict literal sense, for two good reasons. First of all, your eye cannot cause you to sin. Your eye has never made you sin. My eye has never made me sin. It may be the means, the instrument of sin, but it can never be the cause of sin, and neither can your right hand. And no physical part of the body can cause us to sin. Sin originates in the heart. So he cannot be speaking literally, cut off your right hand. And then notice, secondly, that he speaks only about the right eye and the right hand. Well, I ask the question, what good would it do you if you took this literally and you plucked out your right eye, but you could still see with your left? You cut off your right hand. You can still hold the computer mouse with your left hand. It wouldn't do any good, would it? So by speaking about